Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from the Flower Kings, titled Desolation Rose. Now, it shouldn't be any surprise to, anybody at this point that I'm a big fan of progressive rock. Bearing its roots in the psychedelic rock, classical rock, and early metal of the late 60s, it was a genre known for concept albums, virtuosity and instrumentation, complex and cerebral themes and lyrics, and offbeat experimentation that defied commercialism. The genre definitively peaked throughout the 70s and declined with the rise of punk, but that doesn't exactly mean that prog rock has gone away. Far from it. It still exists in the form of prog rock that harkens back to the golden age, prog metal in the vein of acts like Dream Theater and Ayreon and late period Porcupine Tree and Steven Wilson that I've already covered, and even what has been described as new prog, like Coheed and Cambria and the Mars Volta. And really, there are great acts that I really like in all three categories, but today, we're going to be talking about a favorite act of mine that fits closest into the group of prog that calls back to the past, yet with enough of a modern touch not to brand them as a throwback. Yes, I'm talking about the Flower Kings, a Swedish prog rock group that began in the early 90s and have continued releasing albums for the past 2 decades. This is their 12th record, and yet they've never really had that critical breakthrough single that would have propelled them to anything close to chart success, and that's a bit of a shame, because you'd be hard-pressed to find a huge following for the band. As I said, because that's disappointing, because this band is really kind of awesome. It's a very cerebral act that often goes for broke with interesting concept album ideas and some great instrumental segments to back it up. Now, I got into the Flower Kings back through their 2006 album Paradox Hotel, which acts as an exploration of various paradoxical situations with breathtaking variety. I mean, who does this outside of prog rock anymore? But it might have been an inopportune time to get into the Flower Kings because after their 2007 album, Some of No Evil, the band took a 5-year break to recharge and come up with new ideas, coming back with their reasonably strong 2012 album, Banks of Eden. And thus, I was overjoyed to hear that they had released another album this year titled Desolation Rose. I would have covered it earlier, but frankly, I was only informed it came out not too long ago. The band has made the statement that they consider this album their most involved, important, and interesting album ever, designed to make the audience question the mainstream media and rethink your whole worldview. Now look, I always get skeptical when prog bands decide to become political, but to be fair, prog rock might be one of the few avenues where political music actually can work well, assuming they put the time and intellectual nuance into effectively articulating their points of view. And really, the Flower Kings have proven in the past that they are capable of that level of intellectual nuance, so I went into Desolation Rose with more than a little excitement. So, how'd it turn out? Well, unsurprisingly, it turned out pretty damn well, all things considered. Make no mistake, Desolation Rose is a very, very good album, possibly even a great one, from a prog rock band who really does deliver here on both instrumentation and big ideas. Is it flawless? Well, no, but it is still quite strong, and I feel in terms of political albums released so far this year, the Flower Kings have released one of the better ones, even if the ideas that they're bringing to the table aren't exactly revolutionary. Now, let's start with the instrumentation and production. And look, if you've been listening to the Flower Kings throughout their past albums at all, you probably already know what to expect. Spacey, measured guitar work, bass that's always memorable but never really obtrusive in the mix, and striking keyboard melodies across a variety of tones. For me, the real surprise standout came from the drummer Felix Lehrman, the newest addition to the band back in 2012, mostly because he's got a good touch on his snare drum and on his cymbals, and he kind of reminds me of former Porcupine Tree drummer Chris Maitland, which for me is only a plus. Now, the guitars of Roy Stolt and Haas Froberg also deserve some mention because they're one of the biggest hidden strengths of the Flower Kings. Although the band doesn't really have the jaw-droppingly virtuoso skills of a band like Dream Theater, they have an uncanny knack for great, simple melody lines that do wonders for anchoring their songs and sticking in the memory. And despite the band's reported shift towards darker music on this album, The Flower Kings have always been a lighthearted act, and the band's fondness for octave-spanning crescendos has not really gone anywhere. Now look, there are a few minor slip-ups in terms of tonal choice. The keyboard tone on Desolation Road feels a little too blaring in the mix, and there are a few moments where the band tries to be technical. It doesn't feel as cohesive as it should. But look, overall, I have very few complaints in this department. Now this also ties back to the vocal delivery by Stolt and Froberg. They've always worked very well together as vocalists, and they have a great, well-practiced harmony that adds a lot to the Flower Kings' appeal. Now, like James LaBrie from Dream Theater, I don't think either guy is greater in their harsher, higher, more angrier vocal range, but for the most part they know their limits and they do stick to them, which I like. But now we have to get to the lyrics and the themes, the areas where the Flower Kings clearly focus their most attention, which have a fair amount of meat on them this time around and are definitely worth some analysis. Now, Stolt's songwriting, in my opinion, has always been very technically strong, with a strong grasp of meter and rhyme, and while the lyrics have never been all that complex per se, the addition of subjects demanding additional nuance have added some layers to the writing on this album. The symbolism is a little bit deeper and a little meatier. As was already stated, this album is largely a critique of mainstream culture on a very broad basis, attacking the military-industrial complex and white tuxedos, the separation between intolerant faith and true love and the resurrected Judas, the mainstream media in the silent masses, the rises of pockets of hard-right fascism across Europe and general ambivalence about it from the majority in dark fascist skies, anti-intellectualism in Desolation Road, and even regression towards beliefs better left in the past on Last Carnivore. And all of these big themes are tied together with the opening track Tower of One, which serves as a broad summary of the entire album going forward, and which frames all of these themes, and the bookending tracks, Sleeping Bones and Blood of Even, the latter two taking a very both pessimistic and then an optimistic view of humanity's place on Earth and in the universe, inquiring about the grand cosmic plan of where we are, and where we're going. Now, keep in mind, everything I just mentioned are incredibly big topics, which some bands would spend entire albums discussing. And the fact that the Flower Kings plow through them rather efficiently does leave me wishing that the band had spent a little bit more time elaborating beyond the fairly straightforward statements in the songs themselves. Now, that's not saying they don't bring a fair amount of nuance to the tracks like the Resurrected Judas and my personal favorite, The Silent Masses, because they definitely do. But the songs just can't help but feel a little bit arch and a little bit broad, not quite with enough detail or enough of a real personal touch to really grip me. Now, here's the thing. The Flower Kings have always been a band that work in very heavy symbolism and very broad strokes. They don't really do small or character focus. They instead go for big emotions, which definitely helps their populist appeal and can make songs like White Tuxedos come across as rallying instead of preachy, which was the trap that the knife fell into with Shaking the Habitual. That being said, I can't help but feel that the band could have given some tracks a little bit more of a chance to breathe and articulate more detail, because, gotta be honest, songs like White Tuxedo, which attempts to tackle the military-industrial complex, nationalistic fervor, foreign intervention, and drone strikes all in one song, it can run the risk of losing some nuance and sounding a little simplistic on the face of it. On the one hand, the simplicity is tolerable because the entire album deals with arc symbolism and stereotypes, which can kind of work in this environment, and definitely helps the instrumentation supports this as well. But on the other hand, it doesn't exactly excuse the background of White Tuxedos filled with clips of Nixon. I mean, I have a hard time taking that sort of broadside remotely seriously, even if I do kind of agree with the sentiments behind it. It just comes across as a little too heavy-handed. Now, on that note, I can't say I'm also the biggest fan of the record's ending. Now, don't get me wrong, I really, really like Blood of Eden, but the album should have ended there, especially considering that Silent Graveyards just repeats lyrics and themes that were already hammered on previous songs, and this little bit, it just feels like an epilogue that's tacked on. Additionally, I didn't really like the inclusion of the bonus disc here as well. Now, as bonus material, it's decent enough, and some of the instrumental segments are pleasant enough to listen to, but none of it really fits with the overall theme of the main album. It never quite does enough to stand out on its own, so really, it's kind of inessential. So, What do I think about the album as a whole? Honestly, Desolation Rose is very strong for what it's trying to be. Is it very broad and occasionally oversimplified? Well, yeah, it kind of is. But it makes up for that with great instrumentation and a ton of passion and delivery, and it never quite reaches the point of jargon or buzzwords. It's what I'm going to call the Green Day paradigm, because Green Day did a lot of the same things in their particular genre, they compensating for occasional bits of heavy-handedness by going forward with a lot of energy and great simplistic chords and melodies that could really stick in your mind and really have that populist appeal. Yeah, every point that the Flower Kings make is at least articulated, at least with some nuance, even if they do come across as heavy-handed at some points. And look, I can't lie and say that the combination of nuanced argumentation, great instrumentation and melodies, and a generally optimistic and hopeful tone on the album, mostly encapsulated through their vocal delivery, it really does a lot for me. With that in mind, Desolation Rose, it's going to get an 8 out of 10 from me, and something of a recommendation. If you're a big fan of progressive rock, inspired by this, particularly that inspired by the 70s with a modern touch, this album is definitely worth a look. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or if there's any other albums you'd like me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to take a listen. Until then, see you next time.